Is Cancun, Mexico safe? Hey, welcome to this video where the goal will be to answer that question for you. Now, I want to let you know that I've spent over 3 months living in Cancun combined. Now, this was first 3-4 times that I was there was for a week-long vacation where I stayed only on resorts, and that was throughout the years between 2015 to 2019. Now, after that time, I've actually lived in Cancun for 2 months amongst, let's say, the locals. That was not me going for vacation. It was me just actually living there, doing my work through the internet. So I'm gonna share with you through some of my experiences living there, what I've learned, and I'll share with you as to whether Cancun is safe or not, so that you have a better understanding of what to expect when you go to Cancun. I'll share with you maybe a few things to avoid. I did have one time a little bit of a challenge. Make sure you stay tuned to the entire video because I had a little bit of a challenge with police. I don't know if I'm going to share exactly what happened, but I'll share with you some details so that you can make sure you avoid getting caught in this situation. I'm going to kind of give you some ideas and you'll be able to basically formulate what happened without me exactly saying. Okay, so with that being said, that instance actually occurred when I was there for vacation, and it did not occur when I was there living actually, for the 2 months that I spent there. So we're going to cover some weather in Cancun. We're going to cover the police, military, they have multiple different kind of organizations that work there. And obviously a little bit of food we're going to cover, and affordability. Anything else that comes to mind, I will let you know. And of course the safety of it as well, kind of with bringing this all together. So the first thing is, the short answer to is Cancun safe? I would say yes, okay? I've never had any problem in Cancun outside of one time that I had some issue with the police. But again, this was a situation I could have avoided. I'll share with you more on that in a bit. Anyways, I would say Cancun is quite safe. Now, of course, you have to use common sense and be mindful of what you do late at night, where you go, etc. Okay, because if you're someone who comes in as a tourist, you are more likely to be a target if you're out, let's say, very late at night. If you drink or do drugs or whatever, you're making yourself open to a higher possibility of negative things occurring. So if you're going to go out, if you're going to drink, if you are going to do any drugs, which I don't recommend that you do, but if you're going to do that, then you want to make sure that at least, if nothing else, you're with people that you know and trust, and that somebody at least is sober that can guide the group throughout the course of the night and into the early morning, whatever you might do, so that you can, get to where you are, your space, where you're staying safely, okay? Now, again, I don't recommend that you go out doing drugs or that you go out drinking, because a lot of, for example, drugs are not going to be legal. It's illegal activity. So, if you're going to do that, you're opening yourself up to get into potential trouble, which, again, is not something you want to get into in a foreign country. Overall, if you're going to use your common sense, you're not going to do, things that are blatantly, we'll say dumb, if you will, and you're not going to violate their laws. You're going to be fine, okay? Now, as far as, will things occur such as, robbery, these things can occur, again, depending on where you go. I've never had it happen to me. I've always been safe and felt safe there. The people have always been nice in all my time that I've been in Cancun, and this was both when I was vacationing there and when I was living there. When I was living there, to be honest, I felt not quite sure what to expect. But the first time I traveled there, I had rented for 1 month a apartment in somebody's home. So it was like a room that I rented in somebody's home. I said an apartment in somebody's home, but it was a room in somebody's home. They picked me up at the airport. They were super friendly. They even offered to cook food for me, where I paid them a little bit every single month, so I didn't have to do my groceries if I didn't want to. And so it was a super nice month that I could spend there. I rented basically a room upstairs. I had a washroom, air conditioning, everything, and it was super cheap to do that when I did it my very first time going there. Now, I did that because I didn't know what to expect, so I wanted to maybe see if I could put myself around other people, feeling that I would be a little bit more comfortable. When I was there that month, I started to venture out a little bit. I started to figuring out how things work, like transportation. If you want to take buses, how those things work. They are super cheap. You can literally get around Cancun. If you figure out how the buses work, you can get around Cancun for like $1 basically per trip, Canadian that is, depending on where you want to go. So the affordability with public transportation is incredibly cheap within the city, and even if you're traveling to other places, outside of Cancun. If you want to use taxis, it's going to be a little bit more. I want you to understand that if you'll use taxis in the tourist zone, they will charge you more money. So you have to understand that, if you're going to do that, ask them for local rates. Tell them, hey, what's the local Mexican rate? And, if they don't give it to you, go to the next taxi. Or like I said, there's nothing wrong with taking the buses. In fact, I always took the buses because the buses are literally less than $1 to go to your destination. And it was super cheap. You just got to figure out which one goes where, what the routes are, and then these buses run all the time. Especially if you want to go from the kind of tourist zone, the hotel zone, to the downtown. You take a bus, it's either number 1 or number 2. They both actually go back and forth. And it's like you pay 11 Mexican peso on this bus. It's not even $1 Canadian. And this, you get on and you pay that peso wherever you want to get off, you get off. So this can take you all the way downtown in a complete different areas of Cancun. And if you are living in the downtown area or other areas, you can take these buses to go to the hotel zone. So I recommend that you do that for public transport. If you're someone who wants to be living there, you know, within, let's say, amongst the locals, within the, we'll call it the real world Cancun, because Cancun is kind of like two worlds. You know, it's not that the hotel zone isn't a real world, it's also a real world, it's a manufactured world, just like the regular Cancun is, but it's like two different worlds, because this hotel zone, you're fairly shielded and protected from, let's say, the real Cancun. And so I really suggest that you try to experience the real Cancun amongst the city, if you will, because it's a phenomenal experience. Of course, you want to experience the beach, the hotel vibes, that's also great. But if you venture off, you will be safe. Just remember, depending on where you go, what you get into, what time of the night, this is very important that you use your common sense with this, okay? Now, we're going to touch on affordability. Cancun is actually quite affordable. Obviously, if you're going to go to the hotel zone, the hotels are going to be more expensive. The malls in that area, everything is more expensive there. If you're going to go to the Cancun, like downtown and different surrounding areas and neighborhood within the Cancun area amongst the locals, it is quite cheap. You'll find food, meals that are way cheaper than in the hotel zone. Rent, being able to rent apartments, rooms, houses, whatever, way cheaper than spending time at hotels. But again, you know, your environment is a little bit different, so you have to be mindful of that. The one thing that you can expect if you're living in Cancun, there's a lot of stray dogs. So it's a little bit like, you know, maybe you want some earplugs, because sometimes late at night these dogs are barking. So if you have earplugs, no problem, they're not going to disturb you. And, you know, that's what I recommend. And sometimes you got to be mindful, because some of these dogs are very protective. They will never do anything to you. I mean, I've never gotten into any issue by them. But some streets, there are certain dogs that they're going to protect, even, you know, their homes. Like there's dogs that are not even stray. You know, they have, you know, owners, I guess, if you will. And they'll really be very protective of their property. So if you walk by, they're going to kind of come out and bark at you or whatever. You know, so you can expect that, but don't be afraid of that. They don't do nothing to you. Just, you know, go to where you want to go, and that's it. So I just wanted to share that with you, because if you're not used to experiencing that, you can probably expect that to happen, at least to some degree. And for sure at night you might hear some dogs barking, so be mindful of that. Obviously, it depends on the neighborhood where you go. There are gated communities in Cancun that are not the hotel zone, where you can rent, where there's security. You know, these areas are much cleaner, and there's also, you know, obviously no stray dogs running around in these areas, so you don't have a bunch of dogs barking late at night. If you're going to live in an area that's not gated without security, you're more likely to have those stray dog scenarios and dogs barking at night. And I've lived in both. The very first time I rented the house, that room in someone's house, I should say, this was in a gated community. The second time, when I spent the second month there, it was in a non-gated community. I rented an apartment by myself, and there was kind of right amongst the locals. That's where we had some stray dogs barking and a couple, you know, dogs, you know, not being so friendly to me when I walked by their place. But other than that, you know, no issues whatsoever that I ever have when I was there. The people are nice, they will communicate with you, they're friendly, you know, it's amazing. Keep in mind, you'll have to, you know, if you don't speak Spanish, you have to use Google Translate, because not many of the locals speak English, or some that do, they don't necessarily speak it very well. The internet, I want to touch on that. The internet is actually quite stable and very good in Cancun. So, you know, you have nothing to worry about if you want to go there and you want to work through the internet. It's incredible. In my experience, I never had any issues, outside of a couple times when there was like a storm, like a kind of a tropical storm, if you will, where the internet was down for either a few hours or a couple days, but nothing major with that. Now, affordability wise, you know, we touched on that a little bit. The hotel zone is much more expensive with everything, but if you take, first off, public transport, it's the cheapest form of transportation, and it's also very fast because they have many buses going all the time. Now, if you rent anywhere within Cancun, you're going to have a much cheaper, let's say, rent, you know, ability to rent things, and food and everything, as I already mentioned, is much cheaper within the city amongst the locals. And I'll give you a tip for this. Even if you find a place to rent, and you don't want to necessarily pay that price. Some of the local people will also charge you more just because you're someone who's Mexican. And I'll share some of this a little bit. I had actually an experience where I lived in an apartment with other tenants, and I had my own apartment, they had their apartment, but I communicated with them one time, and they told me how much rent they were paying. So these Mexican locals were paying at the time 2,500 peso a month, and I was paying 5,000. So what I learned from that is, oh, if the Mexican landlords see that you're a tourist, they will naturally charge you more than they will charge the Mexican people. So when you go into scenarios where you rent something, what I encourage you to do is ask the owner if you can come look at the place, and then ask them what is the amount, and they'll tell you the amount, and you say, hey, is this the local Mexican rate? You know, tell them, I'm a local here, I'm living here, so I would want the local Mexican rate. And when they know that you know that, they'll give you most likely a better deal. And even if it's not as low as they'll give you the locals, you can get a better deal overall. So I recommend that you do that, because you have to know that when the locals, let's say they see you as a tourist, they naturally think that you have more money. And maybe not all, but many of them might. And so they will, naturally charge you more. If you don't question it, you'll just pay that and you'll end up paying more. And I had, figured that out, when I was talking to some tenants that were living in the same apartment building as I was, and they just randomly told me what they were paying in rent. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Anyways, that covers affordability. Let's quickly cover the weather. The weather in Cancun is hot. So if you're not a fan of incredible heat, then, obviously maybe don't go there for too long. But if you love sunshine and you love beautiful beaches with beautiful ocean, you don't even have to go to the hotel zone to get access to the beach and the oceans, because the beaches are public beaches and you can just go there. There's many public spots that you can go to. Amazing, incredible. There's obviously different ones. There's one beach that is in line with, I forget the name of the beach, but anyway, it's in line with almost, I shouldn't say it's in line with the island Isla Mujeres, because it might not sound that great, because there might be multiple areas of the beach in line with Isla Mujeres. But there's this one beach that if you enter the hotel zone right from the downtown, I forgot the actual name of it as I'm filming this video, but there's a lot more local people there, and it's a much smaller beach. If you go further towards the other end of the hotel zone, the end that is closer to the airport, that end there is much more open. I find, less locals are there. There's more tourists there. So depending on what you want to go for, check out multiple different areas. And, whatever fits your vibe, that's what you can go to. And maybe you want to try different beaches. Amazing. The sand on the beach in Cancun, the type of white that it is, and the type of blue that the ocean is, I've never seen that anywhere else. Just amazing and beautiful. The ocean, on a hot day, you go in there, cool, it's incredible. So you'll have a wonderful experience there. Now, if you're in the city, keep in mind, rent something that has air conditioning, because it's very hot. So you're not going to want to spend a bunch of time in your apartment if it does not have any air conditioning. And I'm not saying you should spend a bunch of time in your apartment, but if you're going to go to Cancun and you're going to be doing work, then you'll have to obviously have a place where you're going to be able to work from. If it's through the internet, then you can have the option to go to local cafes, of course. Most of the local cafes have, air conditioning or some, airflow moving through that. It's pretty good. So that could be a great option. But if you're going to be even in your house working there or apartment, take one with AC. It's worth paying a little bit more, even if you have to pay for the air conditioning yourself, because it's worth it, trust me. And late at night too, when you're going to be trying to sleep there, that heat, it's not going to be friendly to sleep and sweat, and it's no fun, trust me, okay? Because I've had experiences living in Mexico, not in Cancun, but I've had experience living in Mexico in the heat without air conditioning, and you don't want to go down that route. Trust me, I promise you. Take with air conditioning, pay that extra little bit, it's going to be more than worth it, okay? Anyways, that covers the weather part in Cancun. Now, I want to touch on the police part and military a little bit, and I'll share with you one of the experiences I had in Cancun so you can get a little bit of a better idea. Anyway, you can formulate for yourself what I did. And this happened when I was on vacation. But let's focus on police, military. See, they have a few different groups there. They have the police, and then they have the National Guard, and then they have the military personnel. So there's 3 different groups, and I'm not quite sure what each of the different groups do. The one thing that I am sure is the National Guard people, they make sure that if they come around and they check and you are illegal in the country, you're going to have problems, and I don't know what your problems are going to be. So you want to make sure that you're in that country legally. I'll give you a few tips for when you go to Mexico in general, that you want to make sure that when you go into the country, they can give you 6 months at a time. sometimes they're not going to give you 6 months. I've always gotten 6 months when I've asked for it. The only thing that I would encourage that you do is book an exit flight out of the country that is 6 months from the date that you come into the country. And they will see that you have your exit flight booked, and they're more likely to give you the 6 months, okay? Keep in mind, you can book your exit flight 24 hours before you know, let's say for example, you want to go to Cancun. Let's say you get to Cancun 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You can book your, let's say your exit flight out of Mexico 6 months from that date where you would enter the country, and you book it right before your flight departure is wherever you're flying from to go to Cancun. You book your, you know, flight to exit Cancun 6 months from there, you know, from that date. Let's say you book it a couple hours before your flight leaves or before you check in, okay? Because you have 24 hours. So what you can do is once you hit customs in Cancun, they're gonna basically ask you, what do you want to do here? You're here for tourism purposes. Say, yeah, I'm here. If you're doing work, you're not allowed to, let's say, work there if you're not residency. If you do your work online, just tell them, yeah, I'm doing my work online. That's how I'm supporting myself. And so I'll be exploring and supporting the local economy. That's what I want to do. And they're going to love that. So they're going to let you in. Now, if they're going to say, hey, show me your reservation where you're staying, you want to make sure that you have a reservation that you can at least show them the first little bit that you know where you're going. And they're most likely not going to ask you to show proof of income. They didn't ask me for that. They just asked me how much money I make every month. I just gave them a number. They were satisfied with it. They never did any reference checks on me. And this is when I'm asking for 6 months at a time, okay? Now, it's also important that you have that exit flight booked because they're going to say, hey, do you have a flight out of the country? If you show them, yes, I have a flight booked, it's 6 months from now, they're more likely to give you 180 days because they already see that, you know, you answered all the questions, you're confident, and you have a flight for 6 months out of the country. Now, if you are then through customs, you go on the internet and you go cancel your flight and you get a refund for your money if you don't want that flight. So it's super simple. That way you don't have to spend money on a flight that you might not want to use if you don't know yet where you want to go. I've had that scenario a couple times where I had to do that, so keep that in mind. Now, if you overstay, I want to touch on this very quickly. If you overstay and you stay illegal in Mexico, which has happened to me already as well. So I'll share with you that it's not a big deal if you don't get stopped by the National Guard people. If you get stopped by the National Guard people, you may have some problems. Like, you know, maybe they lock you up somewhere. I don't know. It never happened to me. It happened to people that I've heard stories from, but again, I don't know how true they are. So you don't want to be in the country illegally. If you do go illegally into the country, not illegally if you go into it, if you overstay past how long they let you. If you don't get stopped by the National Guard people, no problem. But when you go to the airport, go to immigration, and all you have to do is pay something like 40 to 60 Canadian dollars, and they will, you know, give you a new stamp, and you're good to go to exit the country. That's it, okay? So it's not a big deal to overstay if you don't get stopped by the National Guard people. But I'm going to stress this, if you're going to travel around Mexico, they have checkpoints where they stop you, the National Guard people, and they will check. I've had a friend of mine that he traveled to different areas and he got stopped on the bus like 3, 4, 5 times per trip. And they make you show your papers to make sure that you're legal. So keep this in mind. If you're just going to, let's say, Cancun and you're, you know, not traveling to other places, you have less likelihood of getting stopped by National Guard people. Sometimes out of nowhere, they're going to be walking on the beach and they'll ask you, hey, can you show me your passport? Can you show me your thing to make sure that you're legal? So that can happen. But anyway, the long and the short of this is make sure that you stay legally. That's the long and the short of it, because you could get into situations that you don't want to be in if you're staying past what they let you. Anyway, I just wanted to cover that, and I'll go more in depth on another video on that because I actually overstayed by 7 months one time, and it happened because I was trying to get residency. Anyways, thankfully, you know, I never got stopped, but throughout that time I had many people that I knew that they would get stopped and checked, and you know, I'm just sharing this with you because I want to make sure that you stay in the country legally and, you know, don't overstay. Okay, it's that simple because you're going to get into things that you don't want to get into if you get stopped, like I said. Anyways, the final part that I want to cover about the police and the army people. So I've never ever gotten stopped by army people, but I've gotten stopped by the police. Now, in my experience, all the police did was they would do a quick search on me and they would stop me, and this was always at night when it was dark, and they would say drug us, so I'm assuming they wanted to check if I have drugs. Now, when I go out late at night in Mexico, I usually don't take anything with me. I might have my keys, and that's it, okay? So I make sure that I'm not walking around with a bunch of money or a bunch of valuables on me in case of scenarios like that. And the times I've gotten stopped, all they would do is they said drug us, they checked my pockets, everything, making sure I have nothing, and they would let me go. Now, I've had friends that have told me they've gotten robbed. I don't know if that's true. You know, I can only believe what they say. I'm assuming they wouldn't make it up. And usually this happens late at night. In every instance, it's never happened during the day, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, the police incident that I had in Cancun, this was my second time, I think, in Cancun. Actually my first. I think it was my first or second time in Cancun, going there as a tourist. And I'll share with you roughly what happened, and you can draw the conclusion for yourself. So this is something that you can be aware of if you're going there, especially as a tourist, that it can happen, so you do not get into this situation. So what happened was, I went out partying one night, and I think I was 18 or 19 at the time. I'm pretty sure it was my first time in Cancun. I went out partying, we go to this nightclub, and I think the nightclub was called The City. If you're in Cancun, that's what it was called. And it was a lot of people, a lot going on that night. I drank way too much. And when I left the nightclub at about 3:30 or 4 in the morning, my friend that I had gone with, he left, he disappeared with someone. So I had no idea where he was. Now, I stayed in a resort that was actually very close to that nightclub, like 10-minute walking distance. So I was like, okay, let me just walk back to the, resort, and I'm just gonna go to sleep. And as I was walking back to this resort, this woman comes up to me, and it was a beautiful woman, and she starts talking to me, and she basically offered, that we could go have sex. And I mean, I was like 3:30, 4 in the morning, completely intoxicated. I mean, I'm like, yes. So I'm like, let's go to my, to my hotel. And so we were going, and then she tells me that I have to pay. And I was like, oh. But at this point, then I was like, well, I just want to have sex. So what I decided to do was like, well, I'm just going to go give you money. So what happened was, we go to the hotel. They would not let her in at the hotel. So she said, no problem. I know a place, okay? You can trust me, it's safe. I know of a place. And I got my card. I got some peso from the ATM. And then she took me to this place. And it was not very far from the hotel, but it was outside, okay? It was outside, but it was hidden. So there was trees around it. Anyways, you get the idea. So we went in there, and things started to occur. And then the next thing I know, there's flashlights there, and there's police. And they handcuff me, and they arrest me, and they let her go. And they don't speak Spanish, 2 of them. One of them, there was 3. So there was 3 police, then their pickup truck, they handcuffed me, they let her go. And they took me into their vehicle, and they started driving. And one of them spoke a little bit of English. So here I was handcuffed in the back of this police car like 3:30 or 4 in the morning in Cancun. And we're driving, and I'm like thinking to myself, this is not good because I have a flight out of the country in less than 48 hours. The roommate I was staying with, he disappeared. I had no idea where he was. I couldn't communicate with him. So I'm like, well, how am I going to get out of the situation? So what I did was I just told the officer, hey, what if, well, first I asked him, hey, where are we going? And he said, we're going to the police station. I said, what are we going to do there? He said, well, you're going to be detained for 48 hours. And then he said something about I would have to face a judge for a hearing or something. And again, I don't know if he was making this stuff up on the fly. I have no idea, but that's what he said. And he said, you'll have to pay $300 when we get to the station. And I said, well, okay, why don't I just pay you the $300 and you let me go and we forget that this ever happened? And he said, I can't do that. And I offered it again, and he kept saying he can't do it. So I'm like thinking to myself, okay, like this is, this is not a good situation to be in. So for a moment I contemplated if I should start crying and thinking maybe if I cry, maybe they feel sorry for me or something, they let me go. I'm like, no, let's not do that. We're not going to go that route. So I just took the route of over and over saying, hey, like, please, I'll just give you the money. Just take me to an ATM, I'll get the money, I'll pay you, take me back to where you picked me up, and we'll call it good. And he kept saying he can't, and then just out of nowhere, he finally said, okay. And he took me to this ATM. So again, I don't know if he just wanted to, make it look like, no, I can't do this. I don't know what their plan was, if that was kind of in the works all along, I don't know. But eventually, they took me to an ATM, I told them, hey, please uncuff me, don't cuff me anymore. Let me take the money, drive me back to where you picked me up, because once he drove me back to where he picked me up, I would know where the hotel was, and I could go back to the hotel. And I was like, once you drive me back, I'll give you the money. Now, goodness knows they could have just taken the money, no problem, of course. But what ended up happening was he uncuffed me, I got the money. He said, okay, just get in the vehicle again, I'll drive you back. He drove me all the way back, opened up the door, gave him the money. He said, "What's your name?" I told him my name. He told me his. I don't know what it was. He put out his hand for a fist bump. He said, "Have a wonderful rest of your night." And I basically took myself and I walked myself back to the apartment, or not the apartment, the hotel. Now, what happened on the way back to the apartment, the same woman, on my way back to the apartment again, and she wanted to have sex again. I'm like, no way, not after this. She's like, no, I know a place we can go right here, it's safe. I'm like, no, you know what just happened? You know what just happened? No way. And I went to my hotel and I slept, and then the next day I found my roommate, and that's it. So I had that instance with the police, but I've never had anything outside of that, and this was all, my fault, 100%, and this happened very late, well, I say late night, very early morning when I was there as a tourist. These are things you want to be mindful of. I'm sharing that with you so you don't get into that situation, because that could have been a situation 100% I could have avoided that, and it's a lesson learned for myself. And then the other instances where the police would just stop me to search me for drugs, etc. This was always late at night. Again, I've had friends that they get stopped and the police actually rob them. I cannot say that they do that because they didn't do it to me. I've only heard that from friends and other people. It never happened to me. Now, when I go out, they would search me, but I had nothing for them to take. So I don't know. You just want to be mindful of that. During the day, I've never ever had any problem with police. In fact, I've never gotten stopped by police during the day. I've never gotten stopped by the National Guard people. I've also never gotten stopped by the military people. You will, however, hear stories from other people that have said, hey, I got stopped by them and they robbed me, or I got stopped and this happened, or I got stopped and they checked to see if I'm legal in the country. These things happen, but they've never happened to me. So I cannot say that. I can only say what other people have told me, but again, it never happened to me, so I want to stress that. Okay, that gives you a better idea of Cancun, if it's safe or not. I would recommend to go to Cancun. It's beautiful. It's amazing. You're going to have a wonderful time, regardless if you go as a tourist or if you go as someone just living there. You can go someone living there amongst the locals. You can live much cheaper. You can go to the hotel zone area, enjoy the beautiful, upscale, clean environments. And you can also have nice, upscale, clean environments in different areas in Cancun, especially some gated communities as well. They offer more security. And so there's a lot to offer and a lot for you in Cancun. And it's beautiful if you love the heat, the ocean, everything amazing in Cancun. Just be mindful, use your common sense, the things you get into, especially late at night, and you should not have any problems. With that said, thank you for tuning into this video. I appreciate it so much. Give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already, if you found value in it. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave them in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss future videos that I produce for you. I'll be sharing more videos with you about my own experiences, whether it's related to travel and more. So that's the goal, to share with you as I'm experiencing life, things that can hopefully be valuable for you. So make sure you subscribe. And finally, go to the description of this video below right now. There's a few offers that I have there for you. You can go check out every single offer and get access to all the offers that you need and or want. And note that any offer that you get access to, I will be getting a percentage of. So I appreciate you so much for going to the description, for checking out the offers, and for making any purchases that you do make. Through that process, you also support me, and that helps me a lot. So thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you so much. Until I see you next time, let's go.